Hello chaps and chapettes, and I hope you're all well, and welcome backwards to a history of the Valentine Archer edition. Yes, I'm going to be doing an episode on the Archer today, and that terrible backwards sort of use in my intro. I'm sorry for that. Anyway, at the start of the war, the Allies were lagging behind in the tank hunting department. They had plenty of infantry and support tanks, breakthrough tanks and heavy tanks, but not many heavily gunned tanks capable of defeating their enemy's armour. Most of the tanks were armed with 40 to 57mm cannons at the time, which were only capable of defeating an enemy tank if they got up close, basically. While some tanks, such as the M3 Lee / Grant of course, had a larger caliber cannon, the 75mm cannon, it was built into the hull of the tank, and had rather poor performance. America had jumped on the tank hunting doctrine much earlier than the British, with the M10 Wolverine, or Achilles in Britain, and up-armed some of them. Britain actually up-armed some of them with the quick-firing 17-pounder, the 76mm gun, hence the Achilles just having a slight little bit of punch to them. Meanwhile, the Wehrmacht had a dozen or so tank hunting vehicle types. Not just, they had a fair few different tank hunters at the time. Along with their tanks becoming more capable and stronger in the armour department, with things like the Tiger and the Panther now in the field, the British were seriously outgunned, and it was decided that while new tanks were in the works, such as the Cromwell, they needed vehicles capable of working as a pure tank hunter. Originally, the plan was to use the Churchill, mounting it with a 76mm. However, due to the weight, the length, and using the short 17-pounder, the performance was abysmal, and we have that in-game, the Churchill gun carriage. It's terrible. Now, one large issue with a tank destroyer, it had to use the long 76mm. The barrel length is so long it hampers the performance of many vehicles, making it hard to work in built-up areas or wooded areas. So, a novel idea was had by the Vickers Armstrong Company. Using their existing Valentine chassis, engine and drivetrain, basically everything but the turret of a Valentine, which itself was considered slightly out of date now, so being constructed on the obsolescent vehicle would be a good choice for a tank destroyer. The tank had an okay speed, performance on rough terrain, and the designers decided to make the tank have a rear-facing gun, sitting over the large engine bay. This meant the tank did not have to worry about traversing narrow areas, as the gun was only slightly longer than the tank itself. This made the tank extremely useful for ambush or defensive positions, as it could easily fire a shot and then move from its position. One rather large drawback, however, of the design was that the breech was extremely close to the driver's head, where he had to sit ready to move the tank, basically. And once a shot was fired, if he was moving his head slightly into the wrong position, he would basically get his skull cracked by the breech. One other interesting thing with the gun was the fact that the crews would often camouflage the tip of it, the barrel of the gun, to make it look like a smaller gun, because when the Germans saw a 17-pounder, 76mm gun, they knew that it was dangerous and they had to take that vehicle out quickly. So often the Allies would disguise this by using a sort of dazzle camouflage like the ships used, just to make the end of the gun look a little bit smaller, and apparently it helped. I think it was more of a thing that helped the tankers feel a little bit more safe than anything. The gun had relatively good traverse of 11 degrees, with a nice thick mantlet on it as well, and had an elevation of 15 and a depression down to 7.5 degrees. By April of 1943, the unconventional-looking tank hunter had started its prototype program. However, some gremlins were found in the system. But when it was working, performance led to an order of 800 vehicles. However, the tank would not see service until October of 1944. By this time, the Achilles, the Firefly and the Challenger were in service, along with the upgunned Cromwell, capable of taking out most tanks on its own. So the order fell to 655 vehicles in the end. Still a respectable number of tanks. A relatively large issue was found with the tank, however, in the field. Basically, because there was a lot of heat from the engine on the gun, due to it sitting over the engine compartment, over its 6-cylinder diesel engine, the heat haze, and steam if it was raining, could render the gunner blind. Because, of course, he wouldn't be able to see, and when there's heat haze it makes things tricky, which was not a good thing to have happen. The other issue was the barrel would slightly warp. Because of the heat, the barrel would just move ever so slightly or expand slightly, which was something you didn't really want to have happen, as it would really reduce the accuracy of the tank. So, yeah, not something you want in a tank designed to be a sniper, a gun that's not very good at shooting. Due to the lengthy development time of this self-propelled gun, coming towards the end of the war, and by this stage had less use and ability due to other tank hunters of the time being much more versatile, the tank saw service with the Royal Artillery Corps. However, with the Allies on the offensive and not the defensive, this meaning the Archer was used as a support platform. It was mainly used to protect the flanks of the Allies against possible counterattacks, usually dug in so it had a relatively safe spot to sit. Post-war, the Archer saw little service, being stationed with the Royal Armoured Corps, with the occupying British Army of the Rhine, up to the early 1950s. The tank also saw use with the Egyptian Army, and did actually see combat in 1948 in the Arab-Israeli War, where the Archer worked rather well once they were dug in and caused quite a few losses to the Israelis' Armoured Corps, which were using, funny enough, Cromwell's Shermans and even the H-39s of France. This was a bit of an odd war, as you can imagine. You had Panzer IVs, Fiat M1340s fighting alongside Shermans, Matildas, and there were even Renault FTs fighting in it. Of course, the Renault FT being the famous tank from the First World War. And that was generally the Arab side of the conflict. The Arab armies had those. This was a really strange one, as the majority of armies were using both Axis and Allied vehicles at some time, even fighting each other, so you'd have... It was basically like a mixed combat condition, the best way I can describe it in War Thunder terms. What a strange sight it would have been. Once more, the Archer went back into service as well, once the Suez Canal crisis happened in 1956. It's unknown when the Archer actually was finally put out of service by these countries. We know in the early 50s it was retired from British service, but fighting in the Middle East, there is always a chance that a few still survive to this day and remain fighting. As strange as that sounds, a few Second World War tanks were still being used in military conflicts recently by militant forces, rebels and, terrorists and all those kind of lovely people. You had things like, I think there's been a few T-34s, I think there was even a KV-1 or something recently. It's just bizarre seeing these World War II tanks still fighting today. Usually Russian though, because those things just do not die. There are 6 remaining Archers in museums across the globe, one of them in the Yad Vashem memorial site. The tank was actually captured from the Egyptian army in the aforementioned Arab-Israeli War of 1948. So, how is it in-game? How is this tank in-game? The tank's a bit of a novelty, with its reverse gun system. However, with this, it does have extra protection from its engine, meaning you can sometimes take a few hits and survive. The armour of the tank is rather poor and will only stop small arms fire. The other issue, of course, is it is easy to take the tank out from the air. If you've got a plane flying over you, there is a good chance you're not going to make it. Sitting at BR of 3.3 in rank 2 of the British tree, and has one of the strongest guns for its battle rating. However, it's got a relatively slow reload speed of 9 seconds, and that can leave you in trouble, especially against the German long 75mm guns. This tank is best used as a sniper and in a dug-in position, so ridge lines, places like that. You will want to rely on surprise attacks. If you're aiming for the centre of mass of a vehicle, you'll generally take them out with one shot with ease with the AP shell, and this tank's got pretty good velocity as well. You probably would have noticed there, it's got about 800 meters per second of velocity, and around about 160 millimeters of arm penetration at 500 meters. So it will absolutely tear apart most tanks of this BR. Even things like the KV-1 will struggle to stop your shells. The 17-pounder is just a fantastic gun. It really does do a great job. I guess the biggest issue of this tank is the armour. You've only got 20mm of armour, really, and it doesn't stop much. It's slightly curved. There is a slight tilt to it, so it can bounce a little bit, but generally most things will punish you. It has got one of the best turret traverses of a casemate tank destroyer, absolutely destroying things like the Stug and the Su-122s, which are a higher battle rating, of course, and you will face him in the Archer and you will actually be able to take him on pretty well. It is good in situations, but it's not a good tank to go charging in. This isn't a tank to use in an aggressive attacking way. You have to play this tank as a sniper, which means lots of ridge lines, lots of camping, lots of sitting in one position. The other problem with this tank is the reverse speed. Now, the reverse speed of this thing is pretty terrible. I think it's about 8 miles per hour, even less, 7 miles per hour, something silly like that. And going forwards as well, it's not much better. I think it's got about 20 miles per hour to top speed, which again is not very good. It's very slow, and it's that typical reverse gear of the British tanks. And one of the other issues as well is the way the camera works in the game, because the camera will point in this direction. It will point you as the gun is looking, and of course that's not how the tank moves. The tank moves by going reverse, so you've got to actually change the camera angle around yourself constantly to get it in the right position, and it can be quite frustrating as you're driving this thing. You can sometimes take a few hits, as I say, and you will sort of see here there are a couple of hits taken in this match, and you will survive relatively okay, as long as you're not hit by anything too severe. Generally, as I said, like 20mm heavy machine guns, things like that, can cause a bit of damage, but because of the engine in the front, that does give you a bit of extra armour. In all honesty, this tank's more of a novelty than an actual useful tank. It can be fun, it can be good. As I say, the fact it's got the 76mm 17-pounder gun in it at 3.3 makes this thing quite strong, and you will be able to punish any tank really. It's very rare that you will get a bounce, but your lack of mobility, the awkwardness of driving this thing, they all make this tank very frustrating. And it's so easy to make a mistake on a ridgeline. You'll go to reverse, and of course you've got to go forwards to reverse and reverse to go forwards, so sometimes you will muddle that up and you'll end up driving off cliffs and things like that, which is not very fun. But it's not the worst tank in the game. It's by no means terrible. And, well, in the real world, it wasn't terrible either. It did a good job. It did what it needed to do. But it's just one of those strange English tanks of just, bizarre origins and looking completely crazy. Now, one of the, I guess, fun, interesting things on this tank as well was the fact they actually made an amphibious version of this tank, or at least attempted to. And you've got to think, okay, how does that work? They were basically going to make it so it had snorkels. Yeah, a snorkel variant, which it doesn't sound fun for the crew. Basically, what was going to happen was there was going to be a canvas pull-up around the turret section, or, well, yeah, the turret, I guess you can call it a turret, and then it would have 4 air intakes over the exhaust, and of course they're all on the back of the tank, so it would have these giant chimneys on it. I will pop up a picture of this because it just looks incredibly derpy. Of course, the Valentine itself was used for aquatic crossings and things like that, so it wasn't a terrible, stupid idea, but I would not want to be in one of these wading. It would not be very fun. Okay guys, well I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like, subscribe, comment, and all those usual things. And I will see you next time for some more history and reviews of vehicles in War Thunder. Bye bye.